About twice a year, the Church of God sends out a packet. It's online, but it's called the Journal, Ministerial Journal. And in that journal, they contain ideas for sermons, ideas for Bible studies, book reports. People read books and they just critique them online. Possibly you might want to read it if you're studying something or looking into a particular thing. It's very, very helpful to get new ideas and look at things a little bit differently. And the last one we received, it was quite a while ago, but I was drawn to one of the articles written by Mr. Greg Sargent because it mentioned in the title the solution to a biblical mystery. Now, I like mysteries, but I don't like mysteries that aren't solvable. I don't like mysteries that I don't know the conclusion to it. Several years ago, I bought a book on tape at a garage sale, and I didn't know it, but the last tape was missing. I don't know if you've ever read a book, and you get to the last, where's the last chapter? It's not there. That was my experience with him. It was a little disappointing. I did find out through other ways what was the conclusion of it. But it did bother me. Now, mysteries written about by humans, that's okay. They're fun to read and look at, but a mystery from God is a little bit different. I think all of us would be drawn to find out how God solved this mystery. Now, the mystery is, what was wrong with the agreement, that first covenant that God made with Israel on Mount Sinai? What was wrong with that covenant? And also, what is God doing to fix it? There was something wrong with it because it failed to achieve its purpose. God made that covenant with Israel for a reason, and it never did come to fruition. Turn to Hebrews chapter 8. This isn't a conclusion that I came to. It's something that God had written in the Bible telling us that the results were not what he intended. Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 7. For if that first covenant had been faultless, then no place would have been sought for a second. So he says here in Scripture, there was something wrong with that covenant, something wrong with it didn't do what it was supposed to do. What was wrong with it? There are many Christians today that assume that the fault lay with the foundation of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. Because if you talk to many of them, they will say, well, God did away with the Ten Commandments. You don't have to keep them anymore. They're gone. Christ nailed them to the cross. He came to do that. Was that the problem with the first covenant? The commandments, the laws that God gave to man? If that were true, then God would have been the reason it failed, wouldn't it? He gave them something that was impossible to do, and they couldn't do it. You see, there were two parties in that covenant. God was in it, and the nation of Israel. God did everything he promised he would do. You can go in the book of Deuteronomy. It was written just before they went into the promised land. And read, Moses goes through many of the things, many of the commitments that God made to Israel. And he shows through that book, God kept every command, every promise that he made. Every promise he made to Israel, he kept it. Israel was the one that didn't do their part. It wasn't God who failed to do his part. It was Israel. They were the ones that fell short of what they promised to do. They lacked the heart to be obedient to this covenant, the commandments that God gave them. We could look at this even further, what was wrong with them, but I want to take a look at the second part of that mystery. What is God doing to fix the problem? What has he done now to change the outcome of the first covenant? When he made the first covenant, he gave them his laws. He wrote them on stone to show that they're never going to change. They're always going to be there. But Israel and humanity since then couldn't keep them. They couldn't follow the rules, follow the laws. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 8 and continue reading here. In verse 8, it says, because finding fault with them, he says, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after these days, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. God is going to fix the problem with the old covenant by placing his laws in their minds and writing them on their hearts. That's easier said than done, though, isn't it? I mean, I think we're living examples of that fact. We have God's Spirit. We try to do good, don't we? In fact, I think most of us do a very good job in so many areas. You look out at the world, at the flood that happened on the East Coast, and how many people just dove right in. There was a story, I think it was in yesterday afternoon on the news, about a man that opened up his motel and allowed people to come in and not charging him anything. And it said there that people were bringing food to feed the people. There's a lot of good in people. They do a lot of things for others. We do too. We're trying to obey God's laws, aren't we? We try to follow the right way, to respond when that happens. But we can't always do it. Human hearts and minds are deceitful and antagonistic towards God and his laws. Jeremiah 17:9 and Romans 8:7. We didn't follow him, though. We listened to Satan, and that's what humanity has done. What's God doing to help us overcome who and what we are with the things that are going on in our minds? He gave us several blessings with the new covenant, blessings that weren't with the old covenant. First, one of them was the capacity to depart from iniquity, from doing wrong in this life. We have the capacity to do that. And the second one is the promise of inheriting God's kingdom in the future. I want to take a look at the first point. How do we stop living the wrong kind of life? Again, we do the right thing so often. We try very hard. We read the Bible, we study, we pay tithes, we pray for other people. We try and serve as best we can. It's the things that we do that are wrong, that are so difficult to deal with. How do we stop doing the wrong? How does God change people's hearts without controlling them or forcing them to be what he wants them to be? How is God going to do that? That's the mystery I want to look at with you today. How does he cause you to be what you didn't want to be before he started working with you? I mean, most of us can look back in our lives and say, I was trying, but not real hard to live God's way. I was trying to be a decent citizen. But something has happened to us, hasn't it? Something that changes the way we see things, the way we view things. I'm going to use a comparison today with the education system we have in this country. We make our children go to school, don't we? Either you can homeschool them, but they have to go to school. They have to go and be educated. And the system presents information to the students it thinks will make them successful. There's math, there's science, there's many things that they teach them in school, don't they? And you're supposed to take those things and use them, and many people do. Many students will start out and they get really excited about a particular thing, and they'll do real well in that subject. Some do well in others. Some are well-rounded, and they do well in most of the subjects. But what about those that don't? We don't have a way to ensure that everyone will understand the value of what is being taught. You look in our schools, some children will go and they'll drop out. They just don't get what's going on, what's happening. And some go and use it to their benefit. I could use that comparison to look at God's way of life. He presented his commandments, didn't he? But everybody doesn't obey them. Everyone doesn't even try and utilize them. He gave his way of life to Israel when he took them out of Egypt. He explained it to them at Mount Sinai, and they answered him. They told him, we will do that. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 23. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 23. Breaking in here, and Moses says, so it was when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness while the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and you said, skip down to verse 27, you go near and hear all that the Lord our God may say, and tell us all that the Lord our God says to you, and we will hear and do it. He said, we'll do it. You go listen to God, and you come and tell us, and we're going to live that way. We're going to obey God. We're going to benefit from this covenant that God made with us. They accepted his plan, but God knew that they didn't have the heart to go through with it. There was something missing in their heart. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 29. It says, oh, that they had such a heart in them, that they would fear me and always keep all my commandments, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. God knew they may have wanted to at one time, but they just didn't have the heart to keep doing it, to keep going on with it. So God sent Jesus Christ to this earth to give man his plan of salvation. He brought that. And then he died for man. Then he died to pay the penalty for those sins. But he gave us, while he was here, education courses. You might call them that. Education courses that we need to take. Things that he told us about, that if we do them, it'll help us to understand the way God thinks, the way he is. Now, there are many places in Scripture where we can go to look at these courses, I guess I will call them. But I want to go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Let's go there. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 1. It says, and seeing the multitude, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them. That was how they taught back then. They actually would sit down, and people would gather around them, and they would discuss things. Some call it the Sermon on the Mount. But in the next 3 chapters, he tells his disciples what's ahead, what he expects of them, what they're supposed to learn and understand. He's going to give them what they need in order to go forward and start keeping the laws and the commandments. Then he explains what we'll need to do with the way of life he gave to Israel at Mount Sinai. So it was an orderly manner that he presented it to them. Like I said, there's other places in Scripture you can go to and get this, but it seems here he lays it out so we can understand this is what you need to do in order to live the life God expects us to. Matthew chapter 5 in verse 3. It said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These are called the Beatitudes, or the blessings. This blessed means, according to Barclay, that it's something given by God that we didn't deserve, that God approves of something. He approves of this blessing he wants us to have. And it's a joy, it's a complete joy to understand this and realize that God gave this to us. The word poor in chapter 3, or verse 3 it means absolute and abject poverty. In other words, you're at a point in your life when you realize you don't have anything. You're dependent on God for everything. We realize we can't fix ourselves. You get to that point, all of you, I'm sure, have gotten there. You can't fix yourself. You can't change the things you don't like in yourself. You try. People try their whole lives to be better at certain things, but a lot of times you stumble and fall. We need God's help to change who we are. So he gives us access to his Spirit, and we begin to change. But you need that attitude in the beginning for the Spirit to really help us, for us to see God is doing it. We're not doing it ourselves. God is doing it. He's the one that's giving you the power to read the scriptures and say, that applies to me. I've been doing that. I need to stop doing that. That's what opens our mind, God's Spirit. And that's the very first thing we need to realize is he is the one that gives us the power to do that. Zechariah 4:6 says, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. So it's the Spirit that comes into us that we begin to see things we never saw before. We've all talked about that. You know, when you, all of a sudden you read the scriptures and I didn't know it said that. I didn't realize that's what it said. You begin to see things differently. You all remember back in school when you were in class and there was something you didn't understand? Oh, maybe not. I wrote that down and I thought, I don't remember back that far. But I do remember my children and my grandchildren. You know, they were, you know, they'd be stumbling over something, whether it's a word comprehension or a math problem, whatever. And it's just a wonderful thing to see is that, oh, I think that's why a teacher has such a wonderful job, because they probably get to see that every day from a student when they don't understand something and then they begin to comprehend it and it starts to make sense to them. That's what happens to us with God's Spirit in the study of this book. We experience that, aha, that's what that means. Been wondering about that, been struggling with an issue, and God opens your mind and you begin to understand it. He reveals mysteries, things that we didn't know. You have to study, you have to read, you have to want to understand that. But if you do that, God begins to open your mind in a way that he never did before, for you. And you start to read and you start to understand and you start to see it. That is the first point. We have to realize that God is the one that does it. He does it through his Spirit. Can't ever lose sight of that. We need to remain humble and teachable and aware of why it happens through our whole life. God is the one that opened our minds, and God is the one that helps us to grow and change. There's another meaning to that word poor in Matthew 5:3, and that meaning is beggar. I mean, a beggar has nothing, right? They're out there and they're begging, they're asking for something. You have to remember that he gave it to us as a gift, and we could give him nothing in return. We had nothing to give God back for it. He says, here, but you have to want it. You have to want to understand it. And again, he opens your mind and you begin to see, I want to change. I want to be different than I was before. That's this process that we're going through in our lives. It's something we need to remember as we continue to grow, become wiser. The Spirit is the key. And starting in verse 4, he begins to list the changes we'll see in ourselves if we let that Spirit come in. And again, I'm going to present these as courses that we take as we go on as a Christian. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 4. He said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." He says, you're blessed if you mourn. I want you to go to Mark chapter 13 and verse 37. Mark 13, 37. It's just one verse. It says, "What I say to you, I say to all, watch." God tells us to watch. What are we supposed to watch for? What are we supposed to be looking for? I guess what happens in our lives, right? What happens to others around us and what's happening in the world. I'm sure you've been paying attention. I don't know how you can avoid what's happening in the world, what's happening in our own country, the things that are going on, the flood or the hurricane that hit the East Coast, the fires out in California, and that there was a tsunami just a couple of days ago over in Indonesia. Do you mourn when you read about those? Do you look at those situations that the people are in, and do you mourn for them? We do, and it happens to us, for sure, in our families. But do you have this concern for others? Because God does. God is very concerned about what's going on in the world. Mr. Dave Johnson at the feast in Rapid City gave a message about God is concerned about everyone. He's concerned about us, but he's concerned about everyone. But do you mourn for them? Do you look at them and think, oh, if they only knew the right way to live, especially when you look at the poverty and everything that is going on? Do you mourn for them? We need to be that way. That's one of the things God's lists that we need to realize that that's part of who God is. He mourns for the way the world is living. They've made their choices, yes, but God mourns for them because he knows that humanity doesn't have to live that way. We don't have to have that kind of a life. When you see the results of the world's evil causes, do you mourn for those going through it? If you do, you begin to think like God. You begin to have that feeling that God has when he looks at the world. Luke chapter 19 and verse 41. God says he will give comfort to us. Luke 19 and verse 41. It says, now as he drew near, he saw the city, and he wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that made for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. See, that's what God sees, that if man would begin to live his way, they wouldn't experience what they have. Jesus knew what was going to happen in Jerusalem. He knew that it was going to be conquered and destroyed, and he mourned for them. They can't see the solution. They can't see how to fix the problem because it's a mystery to them. Why do we have to go through all this suffering? They don't see it. They don't realize it. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. We know that the earth is where Christ will set up his kingdom when he comes back. It's where it will be established. He says we'll be given it if we learn and understand what a meek person is. Are you meek? Are you a meek person? That isn't something that comes just because you're alive. Meekness it's a way of thinking. It's a way of living. It's a way of acting. Most of us aren't meek. Most of us are the opposite of that. And Jesus is saying here, you need to experience that. You need to start looking at things with that way, with that attitude. It's something you have to learn to do. And Jesus is telling us here, go go after that. Seek to see things from that perspective, from a meek attitude. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. There are people seeking righteousness. There are people that are trying to be righteous and live the right way. You're one of them, right? But do you crave it? Do you desire that like you desire food after you've fasted during the Day of Atonement? Is it something you think, I want to be righteous. I want to live that way. I want to act that way. That's something Jesus is telling us here. That's something you need to crave. Not just try to be righteous, but desire it as much as you desire food when you're hungry. Our physical bodies need food, and our minds need God's help, needs God's Spirit. Meekness is one of his blessings, one of the things that he gives us to help him see the world the way he does. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Is this what defines you, who you are? Have you studied them? Have you practiced them? Are you pure in heart? Is your intent to do right? And again, this is like going to school. You know, when you go to school and you begin to study a subject and you might decide, I don't want to do this particular thing for the rest of my life, and you move on to something else. But this is something you look at and you say, I need to be this way. I need to be meek. I need to care about other people. I need to mourn for them. These are two of the reasons Israel failed to keep the first covenant. They didn't know these are ways of life that they were supposed to live. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9 says, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Boy, the world sure needs peacemakers, doesn't it? There's conflicts going on everywhere. Jesus says peacemakers, people that because of the way they act and because of who they are, they make peace. They have this ability to go into a situation that's a conflict and make peace. Because they, again, that's something they desire, to be peaceful and to make peace, to try and get people to join together instead of be separated. That's what we should be studying. That's what we should be looking into as we go through life, because this is something Jesus is telling us we need to be. He says we're blessed if we do them. The last two of the Beatitudes happen because others don't like who you turn out to be. It's interesting, isn't it? People don't like righteous people. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 10. He said, Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That does seem strange, that you will be persecuted by others because you're righteous. But you don't have to look very far in what you believe and what you think before you realize the world today is in favor of homosexuality. And if you don't believe in it, if you believe that it's wrong and you speak out, you're going to be persecuted for it. This country hasn't gotten to that point yet, but there are some countries, if you speak out against it, you will be put in jail or be arrested or be fined for saying what Scripture tells you. So that is the way the world is going. So again, it's something that you have to be aware of as you go through this, that might be what happens. That might be the difficulty you face. It says here that persecution is a blessing. Do you look at it that way? Or do you look at it, I'm glad there isn't any persecution? I am. I'm grateful there isn't persecution going on in this country. But it's interesting, Jesus tells him here, it's actually a blessing to be persecuted. He says, rejoice and be exceedingly glad. Is that possible? Is it possible to be exceedingly glad because you're being persecuted? There's an example in Scripture I want to look at, Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5 and verse 40. Acts chapter 5 and verse 40. Breaking into the story here, but the apostles were brought in before the Sanhedrin and they were told to stop preaching. So they got together and they discussed it. And in verse 40, let's see, Acts chapter 5, a little too far. Acts chapter 5 and verse 40, it says, and they agreed with him, and when they had called for the apostles and beaten them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus and let them go. So they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and in every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. It's interesting, isn't it, that they thought, what a blessing this is, that we should be persecuted for preaching Jesus Christ. If you can look at things that have happened to you or will in the future, and you can say, I feel blessed, then you're beginning to understand what God is teaching us about all these things that he listed earlier. He's called us to be something. He's called us to be different, to be righteous, to do all the things that he listed there. It's a blessing. It's a blessing to be meek. It's a blessing to mourn. And as you do that, as you live that way, you're going to realize, I want to do more. I want to be more like Jesus Christ was. It's a fantastic blessing. We have not been persecuted in this country. I certainly haven't been. Maybe you have experienced a job or a situation that something happened because you followed God's instructions, but as a rule, it hasn't happened to us. But it will someday. Are you learning that that's what I want to do? I want to do what God tells me to do, despite anything that might happen to you. By the way, while you're taking these classes, going through this, your teacher says he's going to use you. He's going to use you while you're learning and while you're being educated. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 13. Matthew 5:13. He says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Jesus says if you're a student of his, if you're learning and educating and discovering things because of his Spirit, he's going to use you. You're going to have certain qualities. And he uses the example of salt. You know, I always thought salt was a spice, but it isn't. I guess spices and herbs naturally lose their flavor over time, but salt doesn't because it's a mineral. That's what it is. It's salt. It'll always be salt. He says, you are the salt of the earth. So he's placed you in that position. He says, you have flavor. So when you go out and you communicate with other people, you should be adding flavor to it. But if you refuse to do that, he says, you have no value. It's something that you would just throw out. So when you go out and you're communicating and you're working and doing all those things, you should have flavor to it. It may not be the flavor that someone wants, but you don't make it easy for someone to tell a dirty joke, or you don't make it easy for someone to be putting other people down. You say, I don't want to participate in it. I don't mean by putting them down, but you make it aware that that's not who you are. That's not the way you talk or the way you act. He's going to give you the opportunity in your life to be that way. We all have to choose if we want to be that way. You get to choose every time a situation like that comes up. He then uses another example showing what he wants us to be. Matthew 5 and verse 14. Matthew 5:14. He says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under the basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that you may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." I think it interesting that Mr. Menzel spoke about this, because I'm not going to cover it that much. And I thought, that's excellent, because he went into it a lot deeper than I was going to. I was just going to say, God is going to set you in situations that you're going to have to show a light. He's going to give you opportunities to do that. Now, we don't have to, and Mr. Menzel mentioned that. He said, you don't have to do it, but it's an opportunity to do it. But he's not going to allow you to just be a Christian in a closet. You're going to be exposed. You're going to come out. They're going to see you. He says he wants people to see what he has accomplished with you, the changes that are in you. And I think that's so interesting when you begin to study and you change and you haven't seen someone for a long time, their reaction to you, someone you haven't seen for a couple years, and all of a sudden you get together and you're very different. They say, "What's happened to you? You're different. You're not the same as you used to be." That's God's light shining in you. And again, it's not talking about preaching to them. It's talking about shining. A light doesn't make any noise. Verse 16 says, "That they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Again, they may not even like what you are, but it's like, boy, are you ever different. You act very different. He wants people to see your meekness, your mercy, and your pureness of heart. Those are the things you're learning. Those are the things you're looking into. How you live and how you treat others is a way of preaching the gospel. And again, you don't have to speak. It's just how you act. He says here, you will have opportunity to do this. And I'm sure every one of you have experienced that. You go out someplace, like Mr. Menzel talked about, and there was the food on the tray, and pass it around. But he didn't say, "Oh, I just don't want any, thank you," because they asked him. They couldn't understand that, right? But he was a light. And we all get a chance to do that. Again, not preach to them, but just say, "This is who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm glad I get a chance to show others what God has taught me and what I've learned." There's one more thing Jesus points out about the education we'll receive. That's the rules are not going to change. Matthew 5 and verse 17. Matthew 5:17. "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled." What he asked of Israel, he's asking of us. That hasn't changed. God's laws haven't changed. The commandments haven't changed. But they have in the world, haven't they? Whenever you get a new government, the rules change. Whenever you get a new leader, the rules change. But they don't in God's kingdom. They're going to be the same. Take a look at our education system. How much has that changed since you went to school? A lot, hasn't it? They come up with all these ideas of how to educate, and some of them work and some of them don't. They're just experimenting. But God knows that what the rules that he gave us are the ones that bring joy and happiness to our lives. That's not going to happen in God's kingdom. It's the way it was then, it's the way it is now. And in the millennium that we just celebrated at the feast, it's going to be the same. The way to happiness is to live God's way, to live his commandments, to live his laws. If anyone had any doubt about this, who was to blame for the failure of the first covenant, the 3 chapters should remove that. Because here was Jesus' opportunity, right, to explain to people, okay, I've come to change everything now. There's new rules. He didn't. He went right to the commandments. He says nothing has changed in what God expects of us. He expects us to live according to his way. What we're expected to do then, we've learned with the help of his Holy Spirit. So that it all comes together. We're studying, we're learning, we're becoming meek, we care, we've become righteous. But it's because of God's Spirit in us that's chained us. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. That's the 6th commandment. And it's just 4 words long, right? Thou shalt not murder. Jesus here could have said, doesn't apply anymore. Verse 22 says, but I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says you fool, shall be in danger of the hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and then remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. So he says, if you're going to worship God, and you realize I have a problem with one of my brothers, that you should fix that. You should take care of that as soon as possible, not let it drag out. Go right away and fix it. Again, this is all part of the commandment, all part of what God had told us to do. What do you think the disciples thought when he said this? Do you think they knew? Do you think they were aware that this commandment covered all those things? Includes what they thought? It doesn't say, does it? But you wonder, did Israel, did they really understand that that's what God was talking about when he said, you shall not murder? It's talking about relationships and the way we live with each other. Jesus warned them about their leaders. He said, you can't listen to them. You can't do what they do because they don't live this way. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20. Matthew 5 verse 20, it says, for I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. They weren't teaching it. So did the people know? Did they realize this? God was beginning to show them how to live the law. It isn't just, will not murder, but I hate people. He's saying, no, that's the inside, that's the meekness, that's the character that we're building inside of us, that we don't want to live that way. We don't want to be that way. The law isn't just something you do, but it really should define who you are, how you're going to react to a circumstance that comes up. And again, you have to prepare for that. You have to study. You have to understand you're changing yourself. You're changing how you live and act. We're like the disciples. We're learning new things that should change our lives. Because he was teaching them there. He was telling them things they probably didn't know. They probably didn't understand. I want to look at one more law. Matthew 5 and verse 27. Matthew 5:27. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. You can break the law without physically committing the act. That had to be, maybe I would think, a surprise to them. You can actually break these laws and not physically do them. This is where what we looked at earlier will help. If your hunger and thirst for righteousness or are pure in heart, You're not going to be doing that. That isn't going to be your focus. It's going to be on other things, about changing your life in other ways. Get to the point where your mind won't go there. The opportunity might come. Think, I'm not interested in it. I don't want to do that. It isn't that I'm not going to do that. It's I don't want to do that. I don't want to disappoint God. I don't want to live that way. We're being shown here the process of becoming the children of God under the new covenant. The Sermon on the Mount, as it's called by many, is 3 chapters, 111 verses. And the majority of them are telling the disciples, and they were telling us, this is how we need to live. This is how we need to be. The gift God gave to man by sending Jesus Christ is the key to the mystery of the first covenant failure. It didn't work. If you told someone this, if you were just explaining this to someone and you told them that, might they ask, why then didn't God give Israel his Spirit at the start? Why didn't he start out and just give them his Spirit? The answer to that question was all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam believed, Israel believed, and mankind today believes we can solve our own problems. We don't need anyone's help. We can fix it. We're going to find out quite soon that we can't, that mankind is going to go and go until we destroy ourselves. Only then will humans realize God's way is the only way that will work. See, this mystery will be solved, and man will realize God sent his Son to pay that penalty for sin, and through his Spirit, we really can change our lives.